In this video, I experiment with one of the most ancient methods of drawing and writing. These are reed pens, or bamboo calligraphy pens, and this is a bamboo calligraphy brush. I've had these hanging out in the studio for a while because I bought them when I saw them in an art shop ages ago, and it's always sat at the back of my mind with a tickling curiosity. How do they work? Are they any good or are they awful? So we're gonna give it a go today. Before I jump into using them, I want a little bit of context as to their history so I can understand a bit of what to expect or to compare it to. So according to Wikipedia, reed pens are a writing instrument that date back all the way to ancient Egyptian days, 4th century BC. To make a reed pen, scribes would take an undamaged piece of reed about 20 centimeters and leave the end that would be cut into a point in water for some time. This ensures that the pen would not splinter. The reed pen can make many bold strokes and it remains an important tool in calligraphy. So they're still relevant, but they certainly look primitive. They've got elements that are very reminiscent of actual quills or calligraphy pens, including that sort of dot there and a split, I'm assuming, so that you can do wider strokes. That one's not really opening up. Does this one? Ooh, takes a bit of pressure. And how does it hold ink? I don't know. Let's just give it a crack. I was skeptical going into this, I have to admit, and I've never used these before, so I didn't know if, given the hollow end and what looked like a reservoir, if I need to fill it up from the back, but I did a quick Google and it looks like you just dip it, so I just dipped it and gave it a crack, and yeah, really impressive actually. Like thoroughly impressed, not only at the level of control and lack of spillage, but also how nice it looked. It really felt super organic. There wasn't a lot of line weight variation, that's not surprising, but I was super impressed and really satisfied with how crisp it felt. As far as the different reed pens themselves, I really didn't notice that much of a difference. I expected there to be a thicker line or maybe more variation, but to be honest, it was almost exactly the same with the other two pens. If anything, I just lost some control with the thicker ones and they sort of ate up the ink a little bit quicker, but weirdly, the thicker pens, I seem to have the ability to go even thinner and more detailed. So let's jump into creating my first ever reed pen piece using these bamboo dip pens. I decided to go with something fairly thematically appropriate, sketching out an illustration of an Egyptian character sort of writing. I figured sort of an Egyptian scribe using a reed pen would be a fun way to use the reed pen. Just imagining this guy was experiencing the cutting edge of illustration and writing material. I mean, what the heck? Like before this sort of thing was invented, quote unquote, like what did people do? It's so funny to think that there was a time before writing tools were common. But it was really fun to use one of the earliest forms of writing and I guess illustration tools to create this drawing of this little dive back in time. Again, I have to say, I was thoroughly impressed with the level of control, but actually more than anything, the fun. There was something really connecting me to the piece because I was just dipping, using ink, and it was just a bit of bamboo in my hand, putting the ink on paper. From a creative perspective, in a world with lots of digital art, with Procreates and iPads and digital tablets and virtual reality and AI, there is just something immensely satisfying about something natural being used to create something a little more down to earth, a little more human. All right, I'm gonna reserve my judgment until I can try something a little more ambitious, but this is the next thing I'm gonna try. This is a bamboo calligraphy brush. I have higher hopes for this. This calligraphy brush is special to China. It represents one of the 4 treasures of study, which also include paper, ink, and inkstone. And this calligraphy brush has a long history in China. Legend has it that the brush was invented by Meng Tian in 210 BC, a general under the first emperor of the Qin dynasty. The head is made of goat, wolf, rat, or rabbit hair, which of course is softer than its dip pen counterparts, like the quill and the reed pen. They're especially handy for both painting and calligraphy. It's usually made of red sandalwood or mottled bamboo. And this brush is more associated with painting as well as calligraphy, so I think this might give me a chance of doing something a little more cool illustratively. Let's give it a crack. I have to admit, I had low expectations for this one too. I initially thought it'd be way better than the reed pens, but after using the reed pens and them feeling so good, I started to have my doubts, especially given how large the brush bristle tip was. But just like the reed pens, I was wrong. I underestimated this one too. The level of control immediately available to me was surprising, and the variance not only in the thickness of the lines that I could get, but also the texture and the fact that I had control over that. I could get really sharp, thin lines if I loaded up the brush bristles with enough ink, but I could also, with a surprising degree of control, get really thick lines, but also thin out areas and get much more wispy, textury areas too. I continued my dabble, jumping straight into a little bit of an artwork, just a portrait of some guy, I don't know. But I wanted to experiment using the brush to create some sort of naturalistic shading, use some thin areas to create some details and lines in a slightly older face, and play around with the ability to create a variance in textures and line weight variation through the piece. And for a dabble, I was very happy. This was super fun and really effective. So while this pen is more known for calligraphy, I think this will do illustration just fine. And what better thing to illustrate with a Chinese calligraphy pen than a Chinese dragon? Put down a bit of a sketch of a Chinese dragon in a more naturalistic setting, sort of swimming through a lake perhaps. Roughly compose some mountains around it and a character in the foreground who would be our perspective, coming across a dragon in their natural habitat. Then it was just time to go in with my brush and see if I could get that variance and control that I enjoyed in my dabble. But this time, I have to say, every now and then I use a medium I haven't used before and it just pulls me in and beckons me to do more. Add details, muck around with shading, and just build into the piece. It always comes at a risk of overworking it, but it also comes with just a lot of fun. I was learning with every stroke I put down, and I controlled my tendencies to want to add more and more to try and create a piece that has balance, some shading in the water with some reflections, some fine details in areas, blocking out the sharpness to be more central to where our eye is pulled towards the dragon, and keeping much looser and more texture focused around the outside. Finishing off the piece with a character in the foreground looking over this scene, I was just so happy with how this came together and really feel like this is a scene that came to life in large part because of what I painted it with. I am just so chuffed. Like, these were really fun to use. I think they were onto something, you know, maybe they don't make them like they used to. I am gonna put these to one final test. I wanna use them together, but I think in honor of the ancient mediums that I'm using today, I'm gonna use some ancient ink. I'm gonna stick to nothing but ancient. In fact, some of you might remember a while back when I used this. These are ink stinks that you grind inside these ink stink. I did a whole video just using this stuff, but I thought it just makes sense to bring it back for this, and I think maybe using even more naturalistic mediums like a charcoal for the sketch. I'll create one final piece using all of my ancient mediums all together. Diving into the final piece, I did my sketch with charcoal. I feel like that's probably one of the most ancient mediums out there. It's burnt wood. Surely one of the first ways people figured out you can mark stuff was just after having a nice little campfire, Neanderthal times, and ooh, I could draw pictures of horses on cave walls. And I decided to draw a picture of a fictional semi-ancient warrior. Any idea who he is yet? This is, of course, Shan Yu from Mulan, the bad guy from the Disney Mulan cartoon. I think semi-inspired by having just done a Chinese dragon. I was in a China sort of mood, I guess you could say, and I think Mulan is one of the underrated cartoons of our generation, and I think Shan Yu is one of the coolest bad guys who doesn't get enough love. Now, while he lacks some personality compared to other Disney villains, I think whatever he lacks in personality, he well and truly makes up for in badassness. I struggle to think of any Disney villain who feels as stern and strong and intimidating as Shan Yu. I went beyond just a sketch with the charcoal. I added a bit of shading because I thought that layered with the other mediums, the ink with the other tools, would create a really nice layered feeling. And I think I was right, because as soon as I got into using the brush and the ink that I'd ground, it really started to come together really quickly. A mix of texture, sharp detail, and an interesting variety in the this sort of level of coarseness, that watery look mixed with the dry ink look. Ah, it's just so fun. And last, onto the reed pen. I use this to add detail into the background which wouldn't take up much focus, and then to go over some of the areas of Shanyu that had dried to just add a little bit more punch and a bit more definition in some of the areas that felt a bit muddy. And overall, I think these ancient mediums, ink and applicators and charcoal, have worked really well together and created a really fun depiction of a character that I felt deserved a little bit more authentic love. At least in mediums that might have been prevalent when he was around. Fictionally, of course. This was so much fun. I have just really thoroughly enjoyed delving into a variety of mediums that we don't really use much these days, and that's because we have, I guess, more refined ways of doing things, but it's nice to go back to the way things were and just feel what it felt like. Even if you end up drawing a Disney character, it was really fun, and I hope you've had fun with me here today. I will point out that the 10% off of all of my merch is still applied, and it's just worth keeping in mind that if you miss out, then it's gone forever. So any of the classics from this channel, Obnoxious but Consistent, I'm a kinesthetic learner, I'm an adult, all of that fun stuff is actually being phased out, and you have a couple of weeks to get 10% off of any and all of it before it disappears forever. Use the code LASTCHANCE, links in the description. But otherwise, for this video, I hope you've enjoyed it. Hit like if you have, and subscribe for more fun with art and creativity of all kinds. That's it for now, and until next time, I'll see you later.